Now, Marilyn has graciously accepted the invitation again because last time I re aired her show, I got such a great conversation and a lot of requests and whatnot to talk to her again. So, Marilynn Hughes was the founder of the Out of Body Travel Foundation in 2003. The mission is to reduce spiritual and physical hunger worldwide. Marilyn has 98 books that she's written, 40 magazines, and around 15 CDs on the out of body travel and comparative religious mysticism. These books, along with accompanying music and art, are all available for free download at outofbodytravel.org. Now, Marilyn, we've had a lot of conversations here in probably the last few months. And I've been on her podcast. She's been on mine. And I'd love to welcome Marilyn to the show. How are you doing today, Marilyn? I'm doing fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the show again. I had a lot of... Last time I did a simulcast on YouTube, which we are on YouTube in the UPRN YouTube, and I'm going to remote in there while we're talking. But Marilyn, can you add a little bit more to the bio I just gave for you?
Almost complete, that will be serving a huge area of many, many thousands of people, but they need to get the water in, and the well that we could build there would serve not only the medical center that's been built, but also surrounding villages. And so they need to raise about $7,000, and what I've been told is that they've raised about 1,500 of that. So doing the math in my head, we need probably about 5,500 we want to try to work towards raising. So you can go to our site at outofbodytravel.org, and under the main menu, you'll find charitable projects, and you can give a gift there if you're interested in helping out with any of our projects. And also, you know, all of our books and stuff are downloadable for free. So we always say, you know, if you feel like you're benefiting from everything that we're trying to put out there, and you feel like you are able or in a position to do so to help our projects, that'd be great. And of course, anything that you purchase, any the proceeds and stuff always helps a lot of these projects that we're trying to work on. You know, when we first began this whole thing, you know, reducing spiritual and physical hunger worldwide, it began with Mother Teresa's words, Sean. It was Mother Teresa had said that she felt the spiritual hunger in the West was worse than the physical hunger that she saw in other parts of the world. And so we started out with, you know, generally the idea of we're going to reduce spiritual hunger worldwide, and that was, why we wanted to make everything available for free download and make as many resources spiritually available to people as possible. But it was in 2004, a year after our founding, when that huge tsunami hit, that we began raising money for projects worldwide. And since that time, we've raised quite a bit of money. You can look at our projects at the site as well. We focus a lot on building homes, providing food, shelter, but doing a lot of water and sanitation projects also, because the water and sanitation comes from what the United Nations had declared was the biggest obstacle for third world countries to become much more functional in the modern day world, which was water and sanitation. And, we know that people who are living in, extreme poverty are not going to have even the time or resources to even consider, enhancing their spiritual lives. And so we want to do everything we can to work on those issues as well. So we try to do a little bit of both. And so you can check out all the things that we've tried to work on over the years. But that's kind of why we're doing it and what we're doing, and you can kind of get a sense of it. If you go to the site, there's a lot of materials that show you what we've been up to, and you can take a look at it and then see whether or not it's something that you feel you can, you have the means or whatever to contribute to in any way.
Cool, great. Have you actually done any of these away missions for going out and helping these people?
I have not gone to any of them myself, and I'll tell you why. I'm a big stickler on raising the funds for the projects, and so if I can raise $750 or $1,500, which is about how much it costs for an airline ticket to get there, I'm going to use that money for for the purpose of the people that are already there. So I've never actually gone to any of these places. I do have, like with Foundation for Children in Need, I know personally Dr. Geeta and her husband Tom, and they're the founders of the Foundation for Children in Need. Dr. Geeta knew Mother Teresa personally, and Mother Teresa had given her, her own, words of advice. Mother Teresa saw that Dr. Geeta had a special calling. Dr. Geeta and her husband are just very special people. They started the Foundation for Children in Need probably around the same time I started the Out of Body Travel Foundation. I'm not quite sure, but we're pretty close. In the Out of Body Travel Foundation was 2003. They're probably around the same time. But what they started with was taking Dr. Geeta to the outlying villages of India to provide basic care, vaccinations, elderly care, even just infant care, all the basic types of medical care to people who lived in all these outlying villages of India who would never get medical care. And since that time, they've built schools, homes for the aged. They just completed this new facility, which is a home that will house handicapped people as well as other people with medical disabilities and children as well as elderly people. The Out of Body Travel Foundation raised $6,000 for one of the rooms in that building. So they have a place where they have children, they have places where they take care of the elderly. In India, there's a lot of elderly people who end up on the streets. So they're taking care of a lot of the elderly people who in the past would have ended up on the streets, as well as children. And we've we've been sponsoring a lot of kids since the beginning. We have quite a few who have, grown up and gone to college, and who now take care of, their parents and on all of their siblings, and so that it's a really a great system. But Mother Teresa had told Dr. Gita years ago, before she died, that Dr. Gita had a special mission, and she gave her some personal, private instruction about it that assisted her in founding her mission over there in India. So she's a very exceptional woman, and her husband is an exceptional man as well, and he handles most of the administrative stuff while she's the doctor. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, I've not gone on any missions to any of the locations. I try to raise the funds and put the funds directly into the programs that we're raising them for. And so I want to, utilize whatever gift we receive for those projects to go directly to those projects and to the people that need them, rather than, me flying somewhere, and that's expensive. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Try to cut the overhead as back far as possible, get the money and the donations to where it needs to happen. So.
Oh, exactly. And, and that's one of the things that we're very particular about, too, at the Out of Body Travel Foundation, is the charities that we work with are the ones that have the best reputations for, the highest percentage of the proceeds going directly to the projects and to the poor. Up at the high 90, 95 percentile and up. You know what I mean? I'm very particular about that.
Well, tell me a couple of things about your new book that you were telling me about. Was it Christ of the Redemption?
Yes, it's called The Christ of the Redemption, and it is specifically about spiritual warfare and energetic alteration. It's kind of a different book from a lot of the ones I've written, but it is the second book in a series. The first one was called The Limb of the Redemption, and that one was released, I think, last year. And that one also contains within it the Western Book of the Dead, which I compiled at the time when I put that together. And it was a book which talked a lot about and shared a lot about the afterlife journey of souls, and then it goes into the compiled texts regarding the prayers for the dead, which come directly from the Roman Catholic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, which is the second in the series, there is a very, very intensive spiritual warfare that you're going to experience in the out-of-body travel. And what I was led to do in this book was to utilize some of these ancient texts from Dionysius and also Jacob Boehm to show, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's interesting to hear what some of the readers have sent me in emails. You can check some of that out at the website. If you go to the book page, when you go to the website at outofbodytravel.org, if you click on Out of Body Books at the top right of the page, you can go to the page where you can download all of the books. And that series, I believe, is located right after the Mysteries of the Redemption series. So it's the second. I think it's the Mysteries of the Redemption series is the second set of books, and this one is the third. The Christ of the Redemption is unique in that what I'm trying to do, and apparently it's working in terms of the feedback I've received, is trying to show through these intensive spiritual warfare experiences that I've experienced, as well as bringing in these kind of very kind of lofty writings that Dionysius wrote, as well as Jacob Boehme, trying to show how we as human beings energetically actually evolve. In the writings of Boehme, especially, but you also see it in a lot of other, some of the headier mystics, I guess you'd say. And when I say heady, I mean the mystics that are a little bit harder for people to understand, especially for those who may not have ever had like an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience. It's harder for them to understand what these types of mystics are saying. Jacob Boehme is one of those kinds of mystics. Hildegard of Bingen is kind of like that as well. And Dionysius has a few writings that are like that. Not all of Dionysius's writings are like that, but some of his writings are, and I utilize one of them that is. And these are writings where they're actually talking about like the particles of light that come from heaven and move through the soul of mankind. And they're literally describing how evolution moves through our spirits and souls as energy. And so what you're witnessing and experiencing as you follow through with this book is you're experiencing this spiritual warfare, and then you are observing these texts, and it's kind of like moving in motion together with one another, and it all comes together in the sense that you are now seeing how this all is one. The movement of the particular matter, the particulate, the light, the elemental movements begins to make sense. I've even had some of my readers have told me that they purchased the Audible audiobook on this one, and they use it for meditation because it helps them, kind of bring this into their consciousness, so to speak. Because there is a process that Boehme and Dionysius are describing, and you are experiencing as you follow through the out-of-body experiences that I'm describing through the book. One of the really beautiful out-of-body experiences that I had ironically, in the very beginning of the book, there's many experiences in there I'll never forget, but this one is definitely, right there up at the top of the list, is an experience I had where I was taken out of body to just a little building that you would expect to see back in, 2,000 years ago in Palestine or Jerusalem, and I was taken back to basically be in a room with the 12 apostles and to pray with them, mm-hmm. and experience what it was like to pray the liturgy with them. And it was so beautiful because everything was so ordinary. The building was ordinary. Every single one of the 12 apostles was just a regular guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're regular men, and in 2,000 years ago, they're wearing the kinds of garments that they wore at the time. They're not spectacularly dressed. They're kind of dressed kind of shabbily, actually. Kind of dirty, There's this ordinariness about everything. There's even a drabness because things are dusty. We're talking about a desert environment. And here you are having this most extraordinary moment, but yet realizing how ordinary the whole thing also was. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you,
That makes sense to
Sean?
me, but I've had a near-death experience, so it kind
Well,
of
that helps. Yeah,
that
that
helps.
helped. Yeah, definitely. It was so beautiful because, and then at one point, because there's almost like these little spots on the floor where we all have our place that we have to sleep, so little places that we have, and we're all kind of like laying in our little spots on the floor, sleeping and praying. And then at one point during the experience, we're all kind of like getting up and coming together, and we're offering this liturgical prayer up towards the heavens. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And you can see the energy moving as this is happening. And so you start to see how the energy is moving in this normal, ordinary atmosphere, and you start seeing the particles, so to speak. So you start seeing the energetic particles. So you see the extraordinary within the ordinary. And something about this, and of course the prayers are going up towards heaven. The thing about this experience that I think a lot of people could easily miss is the fact of what it really brought out to me was how many of us miss the extraordinariness of ordinary moments in our own lives. Because the only reason we recognize now that moment would have been extraordinary, right, is because we understand now the significance of the 12 apostles. But the experience that I had of it gave me a real sense of how at that moment in time, these were 12 ordinary guys. The extraordinariness of that moment could very easily be missed. You know what I'm saying? And how many moments that are extraordinary are missed because we don't see the extraordinariness hidden within the ordinariness of something that might be happening today.
Well, I actually got my first question for you. Do you? This is totally unrelated with what you just went over, but it was fascinating, and I want to expound upon that. Do you see colors in out of body experiences, according to one of the listeners that's listening in right now?
Yes, and in fact, you absolutely see colors, and the higher vibrational spheres that you will go to, the colors will become brighter, finer, and you will see colors that are not of this world, so to speak. When you go down to the lower spheres, which would be some of the hell realms, the colors get darker and duller and icky. So yes, you absolutely see colors, and the colors become really, really beautiful, bright and light, and you're going to see colors and shades you just don't see on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
The higher you go, and then you will see that the colors dim as you go lower. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The one question that pops into my mind, and this is specific to my experience and my near-death experience, is
Sure.
Can you see just like you usually see in everyday realm, like the 160 kind of purview or view, and not 360? Does that make sense? What I just said? You can see everything all at once, or is it just like a everyday? You're in your body and you're using your eyes, and in this near death or not near death experience or out of body experience, however you want to place it, is that normal or what's the usual norm?
I'm not sure what you mean by 160 or 360.
The angle that you can see. Like if you, like right now, all I can see right now in front of me is my laptop and my iPad and what's directly in front of me, but I can't see anything behind me. In my near
Oh,
death
okay. You're
experience,
talking
yeah,
about focal points.
focal points, so your visual field, if that makes sense.
Yes, you can see what will happen in out of body experiences is that you can experience either or, and there's many variations in between. So, depending on what it is that you're being directed to notice. Um, if there's something that you really need to notice, then you're going to be focused in to notice that. And you can be pulled outward, so to speak, where you're going to have more of a what you call a 360, where you can see more of what's all around. So it can be anywhere from being focused entirely on one thing to being able to see all of it all at the same time, depending on the purpose of whatever the experience might be.
Mm. With my particular experience, when I was having the near death experience, it wasn't like me having a conversation with you, and if you were sitting in front of me, it was like I was in front of you, beside of you, behind you, and then be able to see everything around me. It wasn't like, yeah, there wasn't a hiding spot, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense. And I've had experiences where you experience it exactly how you described it, but I've also had experiences where you are just sitting and talking to somebody face to face or right beside them. So I definitely experienced it in both ways and other ways as well.
Mm. So, let's see. I guess that kind of answered your question. So, with I see that you train or you teach other people about out of body travel. You mentor
Hmm.
people. What entails that?
Well, it usually begins with spiritual counseling, which is offered on my site. There's a little link there on the front page, and it's also under the uh, the main menu. It's right there, spiritual counseling underneath there, and you
Oh,
can go
why
there
there?
and
Yeah,
you can
there it
set
is.
that up. Yeah, and yeah, and when you do that, we begin. Every person is a little different, so the process is different for everyone because basically, when someone signs up for that, we start with whatever and wherever they feel they're ready to start at. So some people have different things that are going on. So various people will have uh, different obstacles that they're working through. But as we work through them, a lot of times there will be people that um, will kind of break through. A lot of my readers actually do experience the out of body travel states as they're reading the books I recommend to them that are I always recommend Come to Wisdom's Door and The Mysteries of the Redemption for people who are starting out. And we have so many people that start having spontaneous experiences as they're reading those books. Many of my readers will just pop me emails, and I respond to all my emails. And if they have questions, I'll answer them. And those who need further help, we'll talk it through with spiritual counseling and things like that. And it is different with every person. So it's kind of hard to say exactly how it goes because it is very different with each person. Some people have blocks involving sexual issues. Some people have blocks regarding religious issues. Some people have blocks um, regarding fear, actual fear of the experience. And there's a lot of things that people work through, and then a lot of it has to do with just little tweaks and taking care of people as they're going through practices, because there's a lot of prayer and meditation. A lot of the process involves long periods of meditation, up to 3 hours at a time. Lying flat, the importance of that comes from the fact that when you do begin to move into the out-of-body travel states, you don't want to be sitting. You want your body to be fine so that you can go into the vibrational state, which comes about as you're going to leave your body, and that you can leave your body and you're not going to like fall over and break the trance, so to speak.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of practices that we get into, a lot of particular prayer. A lot of it has to do with prayer time, meditation. Spiritual reading is a huge part of it. It's not just reading my books, but I get people working on reading some books on mystical theology. I do have a course of study as well that's available at the site, which is also up at the top of the page. You just click on it there. It's a free course of study, and it has a whole course curriculum, which literally goes through a great deal and in pretty much the same order of how I was instructed to learn about things by my own spiritual guardians through my own process. So you're going to learn exactly the way I was told to learn by those who taught me from the spirit world. And so a lot of people want to know, well, how did you do it? And this is exactly how. So there's a whole bunch of things there. And it includes video content, but it also includes reading material and stuff, because there's a lot of mystical theology reading material mostly, which is very important. A lot of this is the writings of some of the greatest mystics, which is really key in changing the way that your mind thinks, which opens up the circuit for the possibility for these things to happen. There's a big, one of the big things that makes this happen with people and makes it happen in a real significant way is when the point of focus changes. And I tell this to a lot of my students, is that once you get your point of focus changed, you're going to be set. And this point of focus is purification. It's when you realize that we are here because we have to undergo purification. We keep coming back here because we are mortal beings. We have both elements of good and evil within us. We are here to go through the process of purification, which requires us to literally do this intrusive self-examination, which allows us to go through those good and evil elements within ourselves and to, purify the dark things within ourselves, to sort through those things that are delusions or deceptions that we have that we don't even realize, things that we believe that are holding us back, things that we are doing that are not propelling us forward, that are propelling us backward or are holding us still. And so when we change our focus and recognize we need to be on that path of purification and that we need to be undergoing this self-scrutiny, which involves taking a hard look at the virtues and the vices, and that's what mystical theology is. But it goes much deeper than that. So a lot of people have not been real exposed to it, but there's a lot of great material available on that stuff. So we get people going in that direction. And the reason why it works is because there's a purpose for it. A lot of people seem to miss the point that we don't have the experiences just because they're cool and they're fun. We have the experiences because they're purposeful and they serve God. They serve God's purpose. God's purpose with them is to enlighten, educate, and propel us forward and help us to purify our souls so that we can accomplish what we came here to accomplish. Once we change our focus and recognize that that's what we want to do, it changes and propels us right into that stream of motion, so to speak, which then becomes out-of-body travel. Because what out-of-body travel then brings into possibility is it enlightens, it opens the door, it opens our eyes, it makes it possible for God to show us the things that we cannot see any other way. A lot of these things I would classify under the energetic truth of certain things. So, like the energetic truth of something about ourselves that we see incorrectly, the energetic truth of something about something else or something in the world. This is how God educates us and allows us to see, even in the sense of, we could even use your near-death experience as an example, just a small part of it, when, just the small part of the fact that God was able to simply show you in a way that you could not deny that he existed. That was the energetic truth that you needed to know. And now you know it in a way you can't deny, right?
Right.
And that was an energetic truth that was altered by that near-death experience. And that's what happens with these out-of-body experiences. But it'll be other things as well. Like, for instance, like I was instructed on many things. Like, for instance, my own issues with lust when I was younger, my own issues with improper use of words, gossip and slander, things that I was not handling properly in my own life. Any kind of thing where we are not honoring life properly, we will be instructed, we will be redirected. And what happens by having the out-of-body travel portal open, it makes it a very direct teaching so that when we are off track, we can be more easily redirected because we can be very directly reached so that we're not just like spinning in our delusions and kind of standing still. We have this opportunity to be reached if we are willing to be receiving. So what happens, and a lot of what my students and I will discuss has to do with, remember, we all want to know the truth regardless of what we may currently believe. So, we are going to be informed of things that we may have thought about ourselves that are not right. And we may have to see things about ourselves that we're not really thrilled to have to see. Of course we are, because that's what purification is. But we also we have to put that in its proper context, because, when we go through this purification process, then we're going to feel really crappy about ourselves. But we have to put it in its proper context as well, which is, well, this is really a good thing. And the reality is that every human being that's ever gone down this road has had to face all these very same things. So we're not alone in it either. We're all the same flawed human beings, and God created us to be that. So he kind of knew that getting into this. So, don't beat yourself up too much. Just focus on the making of the changes, the recognizing, the altering, so that your path can start moving forward. And so we want to see what we need to see. We want to recognize, and then of course there are things that we're going to be shown that are going to challenge things that we may have believed to be true. Just even about the way the universe operates, or even our religious views or our beliefs about, the nature of reality. All of those things are going to be refashioned a little bit. A lot of these things are not really going to be that dramatic. The biggest and hardest part of it is facing ourselves and facing our own flawed nature. That's the hardest part. But if we can actually generate the humility to look at ourselves with that honesty and truth, that's the hardest part. Because once we're able to do that, God has workable clay within us. Once we are good, workable clay, we can become fruitful. And that's all he needs from us. Because then we become useful. He can use us.
So one thing that comes to mind when what causes somebody's never had an out-of-body experience and then poof, they have an out-of-body experience for the first time. Is it just spur of the moment, or is it somebody's actually seeking to have this out-of-body experience, or how's that go, or is it both?
It's both. There, a lot of people will just spontaneously have an experience, and then they have to come to terms with whatever it is that's happening to them. Other people will, a lot of people, what happens is they have this yearning that just comes upon them, and that's, the Holy Spirit is coming upon them in a strong way. And they are seeking meaning in their life. They are looking for the truth. They're chasing it.
They're chasing the truth.
Chasing the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're looking for, the truth. And that's, that in and of itself, that's the Holy Spirit moving in their life, saying, you need something more. And so you'll find a lot of people just are coming forward because they want more meaning. They want to know what it is they're here for. So that also happens. Mm-hmm. So, it's really the same process. Some people, they'll just have something spontaneous happen to them, and then they have to figure out what that was, and it kind of rocks their world. And then other people just all of a sudden become completely discontent with their usual reality. And it's, that's kind of how God works mysteriously within us to make us uncomfortable enough that we will use our time here well. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've got one question from a listener. Is it possible to go into other creatures and experience what they do? I'm assuming this is like a spiritual.
Absolutely, and that's a great question as well. In fact, part of the process, and if you start reading my books, you're going to read about these things. You're not just going to go into other creatures; you're going to go into other forms of life. So, you're going to go into like experiencing what it is like to be a blade of grass. You're going to experience what it's like to be a raindrop. You're going to experience what it's like to be in a thundercloud. And then you're going to experience the reason why is because you are experiencing what life is. You are experiencing what creation is. By seeing all of creation through these different eyes, you are being transformed into something greater. There's an understanding that comes into your spirit and your soul that gives you something more in terms of the understanding of the purpose of our human existence. You absolutely can do that. You can also, for instance, you can be taken back in time or forward in time, and you can experience, or even in the present time, you can experience the actual emotions, feelings, and or physical pain of another human being or of yourself in a previous or future life, if that is a fruitful thing for you in that moment, you can do that, and you will feel it very palpably. You can experience the moment of death of one of your own previous lifetimes. You can experience, and these things are really important because, and one of the reasons why, and these things happen, is because God is allowing us to start learning to process things in a different way, where we are learning to see and feel and understand not just our own point of view, but we are learning to be able to see all those things from many different vantage points. And that is really, really important. One of the big things that happens in the very beginning, ironically, is it's the calling in of all the personalities. It's bringing in the knowledge of all the previous lifetimes into the one vessel. So you're bringing in all the knowledge that you've gained from all of these different lifetimes, but you're also trying to bring in the knowledge of all life. That's why you would also be wanting to understand what it's like to exist as these other forms of life, what it's like to exist as other people, as other creatures. That's part of it. All of these kinds of experiences make you a much fuller existence and being. It gives you more knowledge to work from. It gives us more understanding of all the elements that lead to the events and the reasons and the understanding of why things come to pass and why people make decisions that they make. We end up becoming more universally focused rather than just seeing from a single eye. We see from the many eyes. And again, I'm gonna reference your near-death experience because it's interesting. There are so many things in your near-death experience when we talked about it that I have thought about many, many times, and this is one of them when you talked about all the eyes. But this is one of the ways that can be interpreted, and there's so many others, but this is just one. But we see from the many eyes, and what the many eyes provide us with is perspective, because we usually, as human beings, we see things from just this one centered eye. And the goal of our existence as spiritual beings is to really encompass a greater knowledge that comes from seeing through many, many, many eyes, and having the ability to see through much more than just our own minimal experience here on Earth, but to be able to coalesce much more than that, and many, many other experiences, not just of this Earth, not just of the solar system, not just of other worlds, other planetary worlds, but other spheres of existence, other higher, finer frequencies of vibration. And so this is where all of these things become so important. There's another series of books that I wrote. It's called the Solitary series, and this is kind of comes in here, which is it's a trilogy: the Solitary, the Emissary, and the Potentate. Mm-hmm. And when you even look at the idea of the all-seeing eye, even in the Egyptian mythos, it's the idea of the all-seeing eye, which is this ever-present beinghood of knowledge, which kind of just exists above the pyramid of delusion, below. And in the solitary series, what you'll find as you travel through the journey is what we're trying to do is we are becoming an energy that emanates by bringing within us the knowledge of all life, not just our one life, but of all life. And by bringing in the knowledge that God then brings in with that, which is then infinitely more, we become able to emanate. And that emanation, and this goes back to somewhat like the ancient sacred texts, like the Pistis Sophia, when it talks about the emanations from the eons. What they're talking about is the emanations, and this goes back to also the Christ of the Redemption, which is the book I just released, and the writings of Bohm and Dionysius. They're talking about the emanations which are coming from the eons. These are the emanations of energy which are coming from the higher, finer frequencies of light, which continuously flow through the earth and are capable of reinvigorating and causing an evolutionary construct within the soul of humankind as long as we're capable of receiving it. But most of the time, most souls are not receiving it because they're too unconscious. But those who become open to out-of-body travel and who are going down this path and who are going through the initiations, and those that I'm teaching are doing this, are able to receive those emanations. And as they continue this path, not only that, they become an emanation at some point. We become capable of altering that realm at some point. And I know it's very hard to understand. You can understand it better when you read the books. I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker, and I've always known that, so no problem admitting that. But
well, you have a chance to go back and say, well, does that sound right? Or yeah. Got one question that's similar to the one that we had before, but I've got a listener that says that as a teen, she used to have weird dreams that she thought she was out of body and had out-of-body experiences, and while she was flying around in her town, she'd see things like it was a negative, black and white, but like a negative like on film. But she says she's not sure about it, but it was like a bat or a bird. But feeling of flight was followed by great joy in flying, but she's afraid to fly. I don't know. I guess what she's wanting to know is, have you heard, or what is your thoughts on seeing negative things as like a negative on a film? Is that similar to what you were explaining earlier?
Well, what she's describing sounds to me like she was likely traveling in the astral realm, which is, a lot of people think that the astral realm, because of the fact it's an easy thing to misunderstand, because out-of-body travel is considered the same as astral travel or astral projection or out-of-body experiences. I always clarify this because it's an important clarification. Astral is actually a particular realm, and that is the fourth realm, which overlaps the Earth sphere and every mortal realm. So, we live in what's called a mortal realm, and we live in a third and fourth dimensional reality. And so the astral realm is that fourth dimensional part of it, and that fourth dimensional part of it is fairly unenlivened, is what I would call it. And so, yes, it could very well appear like a negative on a film. It could appear in black and white. It can appear like as if in twilight. So you can experience things like that. What did she say? She saw birds and bats.
It was like, hold on just a second, I'll pull this right back up. It was like she was flying around like a bat or a bird. I'm not exactly
Oh,
sure.
okay. So she was flying around,
Mm-hmm.
but she felt the sense of joy and elation, which she would probably feel because she's flying and she's experiencing the freedom of the spirit. So she was probably actually having an out-of-body experience, but she was seeing what would be the fourth realm, and that's why it appeared the way it appeared. And so she probably did not get beyond that fourth realm. The difference in like astral travel and out-of-body travel is that when you go into out-of-body travel, you're going to be going into multi-dimensional travel into an infinite number of worlds. So you're going to be moving into an infinite number of heavens, hells, and purgatories. And so the difference is it's kind of like it's just a verbiage difference for the most part, because the way people interpret it is just a misinterpretation of the word. But basically the difference between them is astral particularly refers to one realm, whereas out of body can refer to any of them. But if you're going to pursue out of body travel, you're going to start with like fourth realm travel, and then you're going to be going through initiations and rituals that take you into the higher and finer spheres. You're also going to be traveling through, some purgatories, and most people will eventually experience some of the lower realms too, the hell realms. And the reason for that is it can be varied, frankly, but the primary reason for it is that creation continues to create, and we are all required to give back to creation what creation gives to us. So as we are served and given these beautiful gifts in the spiritual, we are also required to give service to others who are in need of service in realms below us. And so we are also required to give back to creation. And so in order for us to continue to rise, we have to always also be working for the betterment of others who need to rise, that we are in a position to help, and that would be those who are below our level of development. So most people eventually are also going to experience some spiritual warfare and dealing with the purgatorial realms, which is more of the purification realms between the heavens and hells, and then the hell realms, which are lower, where you have souls who are ingrained into some pretty heavy-duty vices, and they're just very different. There's a lot of different ones, but once a soul, anytime a soul has a sincere movement to move higher, God sends help. And so one of us is going to be sent immediately, and we go in and help. But you go through training before you do that sort of thing, mystically, and so you really need to worry about it, because you won't be going in unless God has trained you and thinks you're ready to do it. And you can read a lot about that in the Mysteries of the Redemption. You'll see exactly how that training actually takes place. But what you're going to see, too, is there's an infinite number of levels of light that can be traveled, and that is also going to be part of the journey. And in fact, that's usually how most journeys will begin, where you're going to be introduced to a lot of the lighter elements, the joy, the love, the infinite knowledge of God, the angels, the beautiful, beautiful things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what I experienced and what most of my students will experience is that after you go through a lot of that, there comes a point where it's time for you to learn a little bit more about darkness and evil, and that's just kind of one of the rites of passage that we all go through, because we all have to, bring the two together eventually. It's part of how it works. And so that sounds like she was experiencing the astral realm, and that's exactly what it would look like. And like I said, it can look a little bit like black and white or a twilight. Some people will describe it as almost like a twilight with like little like sparkler lights in it sometimes. So a lot of people will describe it in those kinds of ways.
Oh, would you believe we've already been talking for an hour?
Well, it's so much fun.
Yeah, well, the last couple times that when we talked, just the time just flew by. It was just amazing.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah.
That is the truth.
I'd hate to ask, but I know I just got a 1 hour okay from you. Do you want to go any further, or you have other obligations?
Well, sure, we can go for it. Let's do it.
Oh, the listener says thank her for answering for her, and it was very interesting. She actually said that yes, it was like Twilight, but like a negative experience, negative film like visual feel, I guess is what she was trying to go into.
Okay, well, you are very welcome.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to cover, you mentioned spirit guides. Do spirit guides find you, or do you find them, or is it like is it both ways, or what?
Well, I usually refer to them as spiritual guardians rather than spirit guides. And the reason I do that is because I had an experience with Paramahansa Yogananda once. I've seen him a few times, but in particular, he told me to be careful about those that call themselves spirit guides, because sometimes they can be deceivers, and that's a whole nother topic we can talk about sometime, which is discernment on a journey.
Well, that would be my next question, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but with especially when you're first starting, what you want to be thinking about are first and foremost your guardian angel, because everyone has guardian angels. And sometimes your guardian angels are going to be people that that love you. You can have guardian angels might be your deceased parents, if they're in a position to do that, and you might have other guardian angels. You also there's guardian angels that are like that, and then you have guardian angels who are like of an order of angels. Does that make sense?
Sorta, kinda, yeah.
Not quite. Okay, so like for instance, when people cross over, when they go through certain purifications and stuff like that, people can become angels, and people can also go, if they're going in the opposite direction, they can also become demonic forces, depending on their dominance as they continue. Excuse me. But when you so you can have like your mother and father, or somebody that you love can be a quote unquote guardian angel. But there are also, everyone has a guardian angel that is an actual order of angel, guardian angel, which means a guardian angel that is not like someone who used to be a human being, but was always of the order of the angels. Does that make sense?
Yes. That makes sense.
So it's like a very different, it's a celestial being, it's just different. It's a different order. So the first thing is you want to be aware that you have a guardian angel. Then what you're going to have also is you're going to have spiritual teachers that will come and go throughout your life, and they change because you will have different spiritual teachers who will be around you for different parts of your journey that are for different types of lessons. So, for instance, like when you read the Mysteries of the Redemption, you'll read about one of my spiritual teachers whose name was Emmanuel, and he was specifically there to teach me about oneness. And then there was another teacher by the name of Kutahe. And then there was the grandfather. Then there were, there's all these different teachers, and they all had different qualities of the spirit that they were to teach me about and to imbue my soul with. And so each step of the journey, and I still continue, so, that was like 30-some years ago, so there's been probably, I would say, hundreds of those, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So those will continue to move and change as you move and change as a spirit and a soul. Then you have spiritual guardians. So, for instance, like one of my spiritual guardians in the beginning was this Roman soldier, and he would appear kind of like what I at the time might have interpreted as like a guardian angel, but he was more of a spiritual guardian, and he was a protector spirit. But through the years, again, that one, he stayed for a while, and then there would be different protector spirits, which would be around, and it would be different. So, like, for instance, sometimes it would be one protector spirit, sometimes it would be like 100 angels, sometimes it would be Saint Michael, sometimes it would be, a line of angels that would just block, just basically guard my front door, and then, there were also, ironically, extraterrestrial type beings that were also involved in protective type things, but also educational type things. So they were also a part of the spiritual teacher part, but as well as the protector part at different points along the journey. So then you also have things, where I kind of threw them in a little bit there, the ones that everyone knows about, like Saint Michael, the archangels, the choirs of angels, the ones that are known to humankind. The ones I was speaking about more would be more the particular angels that are related to us that are not, specifically, a lot of times people are looking for, a lot of people will ask me this, I want to know which angel watches over me, and, they want to look it up in a dictionary. And the reality is, usually, those particular angels are going to be ones that are not ones that you're going to look up. They're going to be particular angels that are not among the ones that are the archangels or the choirs or the ones that have, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the ones that have a specific function that we will all, benefit from and see at different points in our journeys when it becomes necessary or whatever. But we also have individual celestial guardians that work with us individually who are not known. They're anonymous. They're not known to humankind necessarily. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I've come across certain instances throughout my life that I see happenings and occurrences that I'm like, well, I have no no reason why that came out to the good, but I always attributed it to a guardian angel, definitely. But
Yes.
yeah. Have you?
And
do these guardian angels per se, do they manifest into an actual being in front of you, like say somebody walks up to you and gives you a few words and it absolutely uplifts your spirit at the time? Is that possible?
Yeah, they can do that. And sometimes I think the thing that's important is that everyone knows that they're there, whether you're aware of them or not. So that's important. But yes, they can. They can do that. You can also, St. Padre Pio was a real strong advocate of making people aware of their guardian angels, and he would talk about, don't be shy about asking your guardian angel for help, and so he was real strong about that. And as a result of his words, because I really love St. Padre Pio, and so I listened to him a lot in what he instructs people to do and instructed people to do in the writings that were left behind of his. He, you can ask your guardian angel, to run little errands for you. You know what I mean? Like, so if there are things that need to be done, you can ask your guardian angel, can you go, communicate with the guardian angel of this person that I'm really worried about because they're really depressed and I'm concerned and I need to ask you to get help to them. You know what I mean? Spiritual help, consolation, things like that, So he did some really interesting things in terms of utilizing and remembering to ask your guardian angel when there's something of that nature that you could use some help with. And so we want to remember that we can do that for sure. And you can see, any of these beings can appear to us in out-of-body experiences and give us a message or show us something we need to see or intervene in our lives in some way, or any number of things. There are so many ways that this can happen. So that absolutely, they can do that in quite a number of different ways. But in terms of how this will impact you if you're following like the out-of-body travel path, is that you will slowly be introduced to all of these beings that are around you, and you will be learning from them. And then, as you learn, then, the ones that are finished will move along, and then you'll be introduced to others who are prepared to take you to the next step. And actually, sometimes it's kind of difficult because you miss them, and it's hard to let them go when they're done. You miss them. So, there's a little bit of letting go going on there, but you get used to it over time and understand that that's how it is, and you embrace the beauty of the gifts that they leave behind in terms of the wisdom and the knowledge that they leave with us, which is, it's an energetic thing. What they teach us is they change our energy as well as giving us some type of knowledge that we can, try to express in words. But, knowledge is vibration, and so invariably it always comes down to the knowledge that we are given is always something that changes our vibration a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
does that make sense?
That makes sense. I'd like to ask you a quick question, but first, would you like to take any phone calls from the listeners or anything?
Sure.
Okay, folks, if you are listening to this program, it is live. Today is July 27th, Saturday. It's 9:15 p.m. Eastern Time, or probably, 6:15 your time?
I think so.
Yeah. The number is, hold on just a second. I wish I could commit this to memory. It's 941. 941-994-6917, I think is the number. And for whatever reason, I have a mental block on keeping that in my memory. Let's see. 941. Oh, excuse me. 931 994 6917. 931 994 6917. My guest here is Marilynn Hughes from the Out of Body Travel Foundation, outofbodytravel.org. One of the things that I have spoke about in the last week when I was actually a guest on another show, telling them about my experiences with stuff, was I have come across where I was a respiratory therapist. That one of the things with the respiratory therapy and working in hospital, you see a lot of people pass. And I've experienced, unfortunately and fortunately, a lot of people have passed on my watch. One of the things that I have noticed, not on everybody, it was like a rather not common, but a little bit uncommon experience, that as these people, some people would start seeing folks that had passed in their lives, like one lady was seeing her daddy, and she was in her 80s and saw her daddy that had passed decades ago, and talked to people that I knew had passed in their lives. Is that a common occurrence, or what's happening there, or the God sending spirits to them to aid them as they're about ready to pass?
Well, from what I have read about hospice care, that is a very common experience. And from what I've experienced regarding near-death experiences and also people crossing, it is very common because, yes, God is preparing people. And I've also heard a lot of cases, too, where people have some type of consolatory experience shortly, like within the week before their death, sometimes, where they are given something that gives them peace or consolation as they're getting ready to cross over. What's interesting, though, is there's also, there's near-death studies on both sides of the coin. And when you're dealing with sudden death, which is usually deaths that are not as prepared for, there's a lot of evidence of people having, near-death experiences to a darker place as well. So in Dr. Maurice Rawlings' work, he had calculated that up to 50% of those that he resuscitated who had near-death encounters had encounters to a darker place. And his work is quite fascinating in that sense. And I've heard from a lot of people who've had these experiences in that way too.
Well, one of the things where I was a respiratory therapist, I actually, obviously resuscitated folks, but I've come across a few people that have had their near-death experience. I actually had one lady that had a positive near-death experience, but the weird thing was when I resuscitated her, my first exposure to this particular patient, I never met her before in my entire life. And when I first, encountered her, she was legally, technically passed on. But later on, after we resuscitated her, I visited her again for whatever reason, and I had to be in a room. And she told me, "Hey, you were there last night," and she explained to me exactly what I was doing with her during the resuscitation. And she named, pointed at everybody that was, in her visual field, said this person was doing this person was doing that. And so, well, how did you know that? And she said, I was floating above the bed before he came and got me. So that was one of my first experiences as a respiratory therapist way back. This is about 20 years ago. that I come across that. That was one of those experiences that really burned and engraved into me. That there was something,
Really?
yeah, something out there. Now, my near death experience wasn't quite like that, but I've had other people explain to me other near death experiences that were both positive and some were negative. So I kind of agree with the. I'm not exactly 50-50 on the experience level, but
Yeah.
I've heard both of them. Um, have you come
Well, and
across
a lot
people
of
that?
people who do have, yes, I have heard from a lot of people who've had the negative, but a lot of the cases where they do have the negative experiences do at some point in their experience fall on their knees and pray to God, and then they do either see Christ or I've heard of people who have then seen God the Father, um, depending on their experience. And so some people who start out with the negative experience will then have an experience that's very beautiful, and then the people who've come back, they've come back to tell, so they obviously were resuscitated. But I've had a lot of people who have contacted me about the fact that they had negative near-death experiences, and part of the reason I think they do that is because I do have a lot of books about the dark side of the spiritual, and a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about it. And it's really important that we don't be uncomfortable talking about it, because we're talking about the eternal destiny of souls. And so we need to be honest with people. A lot of the people that I hear from usually come back with certain gifts. For instance, having the ability to see demons, or angels, and or both. So, for instance, I remember one story. This young man was very shaken up because he came back and had the ability to see what what was around us in the world, and so he was able to see like a demon standing next to the nurse at the nurse's station, or the different things that go on. And in my books, I write about these things, about the unseen forces that are working amongst humankind that people are not aware of, whether it's the dark ones or the light ones. We have angels of virtue and we have demons of vice,
Yeah.
And most people are not aware that they're there. A lot of people think it's crazy to think that they are, but then when people are awakened spiritually somehow, whether it's through near-death experience or something else that causes these things, some of these people come back and they have the ability to see the demonic, and all of a sudden they're aware and they see the demons that are walking around amongst humankind in it, and it's disturbing to them at first. It's very different, and they don't know what to do with that information because nobody will obviously listen to them.
Right. So I guess there's a little bit of did I go crazy because of this experience, or yeah. The other coin, and well, I guess it is kind of particular to me. I had kind of come back with the ability to see more of the paranormal, ghosts and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I've had instances where I don't know if, well, I've had two instances or three, maybe three, where I've had be able to do remote viewing.
Okay.
That's kind of I haven't had that happen to me before, but before the near death experience. But I certainly went a lot of places in the near death experience. That's for sure. But is remote viewing part of like the astral projection, or I guess yeah. Let's go down that route. Is a remote viewing part of this out of body travel that you're?
Well, I've been trained in remote viewing, and in my experience, no. But what you're describing, for you, it might be, because I know I know a little bit about your experience, with the NDE, and what you're describing may be, in your case, it may be more similar. What my experience has been is that out-of-body travel is a very different experience than remote viewing, because remote viewing is something that is actually a very well, it's more, first of all, it's more of a psychic, it's more of a trained psychic phenomenon, but it's also, it's a very scripted thing. There's a lot of paperwork to it. There's a very stringent formula for how you put down the impressions. It's a very different process. It's a very physical process as opposed to an out-of-body experience. But what you're describing, in your case, may have been more similar than like what I've experienced as remote viewing. Remote viewing, I think more in terms of like just the definition of it and how it's practiced, stringently in terms of just as it is on the ground is very different, but in the way that you're talking about might not be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the things that I think about almost daily, didn't think about it until we had this discussion. During my near-death experience, I was told to remember all you have to do is realize you're already there. And, this was during my near-death experience. I think about that quite often during my, time alone, that I don't have to have any kind of influence to, kind of get to me, get my attention elsewhere. So I've reflected on that near-death experience. I couldn't tell you how much, and that's one of the things that really pops out at me. Who told that to me was actually God told me that. Just remember, or just realize you're already there.
And what was that? Was that stated in relation to all things, or was in relation to something in particular?
No, it was just it was when I was with God, having a lot of discourse and stuff for whatever reason. God was trying to tell me different things, and I kind of asked, well, how come I can be here and there and everywhere? And that was the response. You just have to realize that you're already there. So,
okay.
That being said, I reflect on that quite a bit. There's other little tidbits I reflect on that I've not told anybody, and I'm sure if my girlfriend's listening to this right now, she'll be asking me afterwards, what was it? So, but
well,
yeah.
And that's probably actually a very good thing for remote viewers to listen to, and because that's good advice for remote viewing, I think.
Well, I don't know. I've never been trained in remote viewing, so just to put that out there, this is just based off of what I've experienced during my near-death experience and afterwards, which
right, yeah.
it was eye-opening to say the least.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah.
What do you do with folks that have had these negative near-death experiences when they come back? Are they? Well, I'm sure they're probably really troubled by the visions and the experiences and stuff. I'm sure there's do you have a one-size-fits-all response to it, or is it always the same or different per person?
That's a good question. It's interesting because people who've had those kinds of experiences are often some of the easier ones to help, and the reason being is because that energetic adjustment has already occurred, Seeing is believing, and they've seen. So I don't have to deal with belief. They're already there.
Yeah.
So we get started on, usually whatever their near-death experience showed them is usually clear enough to give us a starting point. Usually whatever their primary vices are pointed out to them, the things that they need to change are very clear. And so we already know what we need to start working on right away. And, and I have, I've got my little toolbox of, ancient sacred texts and stuff. So it's like, okay, so you're struggling with lust. Oh, you're struggling with greed. Oh, yours is rage. Okay. Then I have my little toolbox of ancient sacred texts. Let's start with this one and this one. And we want to counteract, the vice of rage with temperance. We want to counteract lust with purity. We want to counteract greed with moderation. We want to, so we start. It's actually much more quick and to the point when someone's had, even if it's not a near-death experience, because sometimes people come to me and they just had an experience and they weren't necessarily near-death, but they had an experience that would be akin to that scared them straight, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
And we all have them. If you go into the spiritual journey, you're going to have stuff like this where you are shown things about yourself that are uncomfortable or disturbing. I've had so many I can't count them. And the real. I'll tell you one thing that is definitely goes across the board is that this is a gift. When God shows us exactly where we need to do our work, it's a huge gift because we're saving ourselves so much time. We know exactly where we need to focus. It's a huge gift. It doesn't feel good, It's a real bummer to realize that we are flawed in ways that we had no idea we were flawed. However, it is such a huge gift because we have just shortened the journey by eons simply by pinpointing where we need to get to work. So when we can, first of all, we go right towards what has been pointed out to us, but also recognizing what a gift it is. It's such a gift when, otherwise we're just kind of, wandering around in the dark,
Yeah.
and we don't know what we need to be doing because we're blind to ourselves, and we're all kind of guilty of that. We're all blind to ourselves. I remember I had this one experience when I was 29 that I'll never forget, and I was taken into this realm wherein I was allowed to experience how everything in my life was wrong. And it was wrong because it was all done for wrong reasons. And they were all self-serving reasons. Even the good I had done was done for self-serving reasons, So even the good things I had done were to make me feel better about something, or, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I came back from that experience, and I just, I think I was depressed I just felt so low for a couple months. But that was probably one of the, I've had many transformative periods in my life, and that was one of the most transformative periods in my life. It was a couple of months of feeling horrible about myself, but it was one of those profound transformative points. And so it was also, it was difficult, but it was also one of the most purposeful times in my life, and it ended up creating much more movement in the spiritual journey because it forced my hand, so to speak. It forced me to deal with that selfishness within myself, And I had a near-death experience as well in 2003, and I recently spoke about it on WMAP with Capriana, so people can listen to it on the website at outofbodytravel.org. But one of the things Jesus had told me was that one of our one of the reasons for our existence here is to go from selfishness to selflessness. And so I feel like that's a real simple way to sum up part of what our earthly journey is about. And so, we are trying to undo something here. We're trying to undo this this selfishness that we all have. You know what I mean? It's it's part of our human nature. There is a transformation that we're all seeking. It's all the same one. It's got its variations with our different flaws, our different vices, and our different manifestations, but it's all kind of the same thing. And so we're kind of on the same boat here. So we can all sympathize with each other on that journey, and yet we all have to see kind of the same paint within ourselves in order to progress. So, that 2-month period where I experienced that, extreme sorrow and depression, because I realized, gee, gosh, everything I've ever done was waste because it was all done for the wrong reason. Gee, that sucks.
Well, let's change it up, and one of the things that I personally can agree with, and I'm not sure about you because I've never asked the question, since I know you've had a near-death experience. Near-death experiences usually come back with this loss of fear of death. Is that universal for everyone that has had a near-death experience? Because I've not come across somebody that says, "Hey, I don't want to go through that anymore." So
that is pretty common. That's a pretty universal. I don't know that I can speak for every single person, but from the studies that I've read and everything, it does seem to be that's pretty universal. Most people do lose their fear of death. People do. I think most people may have some fear of going through pain, but death itself, they're not not afraid of that anymore. And I think if anything, I think a lot of people who've had these experiences, they're kind of look forward to being at some point where they can go back, because it was such a beautiful thing and such a beautiful place, and it was it's home. It's home.
Yeah.
I think a lot of near-death experiencers want to go home.
Well, the weird thing about that is, you mentioned that when I was younger, in my teens and in my late teens, early 20s, I caught myself saying, "I want to go home," and I'd be literally in my house, and I'm like, "Why did I say that?" And I even had a girlfriend at the time said, "Sean, you're home. What the heck are you talking about?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Anyway, that I don't know why that kind of just blew my got my mind off on a different tangent right there. Let's see. In our talks, did I ever tell you about when my near death experience started to end? I was arguing with God about coming back. God was wanting me to stay.
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Well, long story short, I was arguing over why I needed to come back, and God said, "No, the people that you're worried about, just wait a moment, and they'll be here, and everything will be fine." And I kept arguing, and then I finally kind of put my foot down, sorta, and said, "No, I got to go back." And during the court, most of the near-death experience, everything was sort of mind-to-mind transference of question and answers kind of stuff. But this is the first time that I remember in the near-death experiences when I said I've got to go back, and finally made up my mind I got to go back. I heard out of my left ear, for whatever reason, this is going to hurt, verbally. And up to that point, I wasn't in any pain. But the loss, it would take a lot of question and answers and stuff to get that story out. But uh, for whatever reason, that just popped into my mind about coming back. Do a lot of people want to come back, or they want to stay, or is it a mix, a healthy mix, or what that you've come
I
across?
think I think it's a mix. In my case, I had the choice to either stay or go back, and because my children were young at the time, I decided I had to go back. And I think people probably make a lot of decisions based on those types of circumstances. From the accounts that I have read, it does seem like most people would like to stay. I certainly would have loved to have stayed. There's no question about that. I think the question comes down to, where you feel called to at that time. And I, as a mom, a young mother at the time, so I think it varies. I think most people want to stay.
Okay.
But they don't always choose that because of other concerns,
Okay. Well, here's a random question for people that experience out of body experiences. Is there a sense of time? Does time flow normally, or do they have senses of missing time per se when they do out of body?
I wouldn't say missing time, but time doesn't flow normally all the time. You can enter into what's called timelessness. There are timeless realms, in the out-of-body travel state, especially when you start going into the initiations into the mysteries and beyond. And also, you can travel back in time, forward in time. So you can experience things where you might be gone for 2 weeks, but yet come back an hour after the moment in time you left the same night.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen, and that's usually how it will play out. So it's not going to be any weird time things here. It's just going to be like, wow, I was gone for 2 weeks, but I came back an hour later. You know what I mean? Things like that. When you go into timelessness, that's explained in a lot of depth in the Mysteries of the Redemption.
Mm-hmm.
But timelessness is when you're kind of you're walking out of the flow of time. Time is only relevant in like mortal worlds like this one. So when you go into the worlds of God, timelessness is the way things operate. Time is not a constraint. Time is what orders universes and worlds like these mortal, third-dimensional type worlds. We have to have this time construct. When you move into certain immortal realms, there is no time. So that's what I mean when I say timelessness. So it's totally different there. It's very different. It's hard to describe, but you can learn a lot about that, like in the Mysteries of the Redemption and things like that.
Well, I've got a pretty good grasp from what I experienced with the time flow and the near-death experience. I liken it to wind blowing. It can blow forward, backwards, different speeds, stay still, come at you in different directions. And that's about as...
I like that analogy. That's an excellent analogy of it. Very well said.
I know it sounds kind of gimmicky to say that, but that's about as close as I can get it to explain, what I experienced then when I had the near-death experience. It was just, I could be at any place at any time in my life, or just wherever God wanted me to experience. I was already there. That was the weird thing. Well, not weird thing. It was an awesome experience, to tell the truth. And the weird, well, I keep saying weird. Uh, the most poignant thing I could say, I did not fear anything in my near death experience, even when I went to hell in the experience. And what was pointed out with me when I went to hell, the angel I was with, um, let me experience part of the hell that a few people were experiencing. And the angel actually asked me, what's the difference between you and, we were referencing a lady that experienced part of her hell with. And I said, I don't know what he said, she doesn't experience God's presence. You do. And that was just part of my near death experience. But I don't know if that would resonate with anybody else, but it did resonate with me, that's for sure.
Yeah, and ironically, in the visions that have been kind of annotated down through the centuries, that's a very common element in the visions of hell, where they say that the difference is that the biggest suffering in hell is the absence of God. And so that's interesting that that's what was pointed out to you. I think. And you had mentioned too about that you're already there in the out of body experience as well. The moment you think of something or a place or a person, you will be there. And so you experience that in out of body travel as well. And another thing I wanted to bring up, because you had asked about it, we didn't really talk about it yet, was spiritual warfare and discernment. And as you go through these processes, those things become important. And in the Mysteries of the Redemption, there's 3 sections. The first part is purification, and the second and third parts are going to teach you a lot about discernment and spiritual warfare, and those are the discrimination and the discipline pathways. And so you're going to learn a lot about those subjects in part 2 and 3 of the Mysteries of the Redemption. But it is very important to learn about the discernment of spirits, because yes, you can be deceived. And so for those who are familiar with the biblical discernment of spirits, that's the one you want to utilize, which in essence includes when you're dealing with a spirit, you want to question them. Do you believe in God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin and was incarnate in human flesh and became the Word? And it's in the book of John, but you can always just look this up on Google, the discernment of spirits, biblical discernment of spirits, and you can read the whole thing and learn about that. That's very important. And in spiritual warfare, you're going to learn a lot about how you're going to discern these sorts of things, because it is a complicated process, and it's a very important process, and it is something that becomes much more important and essential as you're progressing through the path. But like I said, you're going to learn that in the Mysteries of the Redemption, and there's other books as well on our site that will teach you those things, including the latest one, The Christ of the Redemption, which kind of goes into it in a lot more detail. But I don't know if you have any questions on those subjects or not, or is that clear, or does that make sense? Is that a good...
Well, so far that makes sense to me.
Art.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've got
Okay,
about
good.
10 more minutes left out of the show time. And I appreciate you staying over and talking to me about this.
Sure.
Every time I talk to you, it's just, I'm having my own out of body kind of experience with the time kind of zipping by.
We're having a
Timeless.
time folding.
Oh,
What do
yeah.
they call it?
Space and time
Wrinkling time or
continuum.
something.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about. I know you're really into foundation, or you got your own foundation work out of out of body travel, and you have a couple of uh, things that you like to work on with. Uh, it just totally lost my mind. What do you want to share with the group that's listening with us? Um, uh, Final departing words, kinda, if you want to
Okay,
look at it
well,
that way.
first of all, we have, I've written a lot of books. It's like 90 plus books on out of body travel, all of which are available for free download at our website, which is outofbodytravel.org. I also have a ton of music and art, which is also available for free download at the website. The music, ironically, a bunch of the music is music that I heard in out-of-body experiences that I then, composed and tried to transcribe from the out-of-body states and bring into the physical realm. And
Mm-hmm.
then others are, meditations and things like that. One of the CDs that I put out is called The Frequency of Otara, which is actually a technique that was taught to me by the angels as to increasing, trying to kind of replicate the idea of a vibrational raising, which is something that the angels do to try to assist people in bringing people towards an out-of-body experience. So a lot of my readers use that for their meditations and stuff, and it helps them to achieve out-of-body experiences. But there's a lot of stuff there. My art, I'm not the best painter, but I've tried to paint a lot of the things I've seen in out-of-body experiences. So there's probably about 100 paintings that I've done of various things I've seen. And you can see it all at the site. We also have, the charitable projects, which we mentioned earlier on, and we're trying to help our
Yeah.
family in Venezuela. We've got our sponsored children and elderly adults in India, and we're also hoping to raise some funds for this well in Africa to help this medical center, which is going to make a huge difference in that whole region. If you want to help, I would really appreciate it. So you go to the website, and charitable projects is listed under the first tab on that page. And also under the first tab is spiritual counseling. So if you're looking for one-on-one help, that's where you can sign up for that. We also have a totally free course of study that you can follow at the website. So you can sign up for that and take that as well. We have lots of people taking it, and they're having great success with that also. And you can listen to all of the interviews I've done over the years on the site. Just click under Appearances, and Appearances Continued. There was a documentary that was done featuring my work, and it's called The Road to Armageddon, a spiritual documentary. You can watch that at the website completely free as well. That's under Appearances. And so just go to outofbodytravel.org. If you're beginning, start out with Come to Wisdom's Door and the Mysteries of the Redemption. And if you have any questions, my email's right there. It's Marilynn Hughes at outofbodytravel.org, and I welcome any of your questions, answer all my emails, and I love to hear from my readers. And so join us. We have this fantastic forum as well, so we'd love to see you on the forums and on the Facebook page. We have lots of people who talk to each other and questions on the forums as well, so lots of things you can get involved in.
Yeah. Well, Marilynn, I appreciate you, and I thank you so much for the second go at picking your brain about the out of body
Sure.
travel. So
Yeah, I always enjoy talking to you, Sean.
well,
It's a pleasure.
we'll have to do it more often, or I can be on your podcast again, or whatever you want to do. I love talking
Sure.
about my near-death experience. At first, I thought I
Sure.
wasn't able. At first, I was kind of shy doing it, and now it's like, well, when I do it, it reminds me of stuff that I did not recall before, if that makes sense. But anyway.
Yeah, it does. It does. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Well, folks, this has been Chasing the Truth. My guest is Marilynn Hughes. You can find her over at outofbodytravel.org. Outofbodytravel.org. All her contact information, free downloads of books, art, music, all that's over there. Outofbodytravel.org. And you're listening to me on UPRN 107.7 out of the Big Easy in New Orleans. And I appreciate those folks over there. If you're listening to me, please drop me a line at seang@imdarkwaters.com. Obviously, the home of Chasing the Truth is imdarkwaters.com. You can run over there and find the repository of all my shows there, plus all the paranormal content that you expect from Dark Waters, the king of horror, narration, and paranormal. That fellow is constantly busy with that website, so go over there and pick that out. And folks, every Saturday night, 7 p.m. Central Time, you'll find me chasing the truth with you Saturday nights, 7 p.m. Central Time. And folks, next Saturday, let's chase the truth.
Do ghosts really exist? Are we alone? Is there life after death? Find out.
It looked like a giant ape with a man's face.
Pirates and Mermaids. When Ben showed up again, he wasn't alone. He had these 3 guys with him. The first thing I noticed about one of them was that he looked like Ralph Macchio from The Karate Kid. The second guy, who introduced himself as Chef, was about 6 feet tall, and there was no way to avoid looking at the scars he had all over his hands, arms, and face. And the third guy looked kind of foreign, and I didn't like the look in his eyes. He just made your skin crawl. You could feel it. Like this guy wasn't missing some of his screws, but all of his screws. Even when he smiled at me, it just looked fake, like he didn't even know how to use his facial muscles to make a smile. That's when Ben asked if we had done our part and gotten the supplies we needed. But he used this authoritative tone, almost like he was in charge. And based on his tone, I knew in that very moment that it was just a matter of time before Roger and Ben would start bumping heads. And holy shit, let me tell you, when they did, it was explosive. The following day, we boarded our plane and headed to Caracas, Venezuela, a 3-hour flight. Then we headed on a 22-hour flight to Liberia. And it was on this 22-hour flight that the ice began to break, starting with Ben. He told us more about the intel on Sorkin, and he went deep into why he fucking hated it. You see, a few years ago, he was working on a private security mission for Sorkin, protecting some freight ships right off the coast of Africa. And back then, he worked with this guy that he was really close to called Babyface. He had gotten that nickname because he was the spitting image of the notorious mobster Babyface Nelson. Babyface and Ben had worked over 22 jobs together, and during that time, they got extremely close. On this particular mission, Ben, Babyface, and 15 other men were protecting this freight ship. Now, they was under the impression that the only thing they had to do was protect the oil on the ship. And that's when pirates attacked. 6 small boats, Somalis with AK-47s, RPGs, and these fuckers weren't playing. For the most part, this conflict was just target practice for them. That was until 2 of the boats got close enough to the front of the ship and allowed 6 of the pirates to board. They killed 8 of the contractors and were firing RPGs from an elevated position atop some cargo containers. Once the Somalis got that kind of advantage, Ben and Babyface were forced to flee to the hull of the ship. And when they got below deck, Ben said that he realized the ship had been modified. It looked like a standard ship up top, but down below, it was like nothing he'd ever seen before. The two of them quickly devised a plan. They were going to work their way to the front of the ship, come back up, and flank these bastards from behind. Ben told us they had been moving through the ship for about 3 to 5 minutes when they started to take fire below deck. And this wasn't coming from the pirates. These were other contractors. Hold your fire! Hold your fire! We're with you! Hold your fire! But they didn't stop. Now they were in a fucked up situation. They had pirates up above them. And God knows who this was in front of them shooting. It took Ben and Babyface 10 minutes to move forward using suppressive fire, pushing the guys back. And that's when they came across this room. And inside, a massive tank filled with water. A monitoring station with cameras showing everything going on above deck. Inside of the first tank was this creature, and it looked like a woman. In fact, it had breasts like a woman, but the thing was, it had these webbed fingers, and its skin had this greenish blue tint. Ben said the thing that stuck out to him the most was how massive this thing's legs were. It made its upper body look small. In the second tank was another creature. This one, male. And while Ben and Babyface stood there distracted looking at these things, they started taking fire from across the room. And Babyface was hit in the head. Blood, brains, and teeth exploded all over Ben. That's when his eyes glossed over, and you could tell he was becoming emotional. Then he changed the subject to Alessandro. Ben went on to tell us that Alessandro was the single most dangerous operative he knew. Ben said that in order to be successful, we needed to be patient and wait on our opportunity to grab him. After we had our hands on him, we would let Scissors take care of the rest. A dogman encounter happened early one morning. You see, as a trucker, I spend very long hours on the road. And oftentimes, I tend to push myself a little bit further than I need to when driving. This particular day, I'd been driving and started to feel sleepy. So I stopped at Love's truck stop, just off Highway 10 and 90. I got the truck backed in and situated, then climbed to the back seat and went to sleep. When I woke up, it was about 6:45 a.m., so I headed into Love's to grab the shower and some breakfast, coffee, and got back on the road. I was headed to Sierra Vista. As I got on the roadway, the sun was just rising. One of the best things about being a truck driver is the views. Since I was a little kid, I've absolutely loved taking long road trips, and I was always fascinated about the terrain and how it changes across the U.S. I turned taking 90 south, heading towards Sierra Vista, traveling about 65 miles an hour. And just as I'm passing Cavern State Park, I see something leaping across the roadway on my left-hand side. As I got closer to it, this thing was standing in the median, looking at my truck. Then it takes one leap and clears the entire roadway. Now, this is a 2-lane highway, 15 feet per lane at least, and about 8 feet on each side as a buffer. So this thing jumped damn near 40 to 50 feet. And when I say leaped, you should have seen the trajectory of this thing. It jumped up, and had I been closer, it would have easily cleared the hood of my rig. And what it looked like a giant black wolf is all I can tell you. Everything happened so fast, and I know this sounds crazy, but while it was in the air, I could have sworn as this thing took a quick glance at me. It freaked me completely the fuck out. I've heard people on these talk shows saying they go out looking for these creatures. Well, I'll tell you what I saw, no one should be looking for. The muscle mass on this thing was ridiculous. Its arms and shoulders, and I guess you would call it its thighs, were massive. And the speed at which it moved, like nothing I've ever seen. I did tap on my brakes and look through my side mirror once I passed that spot. And this thing was just walking off the roadway. It seemed like my presence didn't faze it at all, nor did the presence of my truck. I'm not sure what it was or where it comes from, but I don't ever want to encounter that thing again. In my early 20s, I worked for a company that had a contract with the U.S. government at the border. And no, I was not a Border Patrol agent. I worked as part of a maintenance program. My job was to maintain the border fences and manage crews of workers. Now, this job was intense. Not only did you have to contend with the weather, but there was a constant flow of illegal aliens and contraband across the border. The illegals posed a minor threat. Most of the times they would hide from you or run away. But the cartel and drug smugglers were a whole nother story. They would kill you at any moment. Although the job was dangerous, our company didn't permit us to carry firearms. However, my crew and I always carried a weapon because we figured our lives were more important than any job. I remember going through the safety training class and how the instructor would joke saying that we should stay in pairs of 2s and 3s. He would say 4 eyes are always better than 2. While in class, a few rumors began to circulate about reasons why this contract had such high turnover. There were some guys that got killed by the cartel, and other guys started seeing strange things in the sky at night. I pretty much heard it all over coffee and smoke breaks. Outside of the cartel business, I believed everything else was bullshit. But there was one exception. Nowadays, you call it Dogman. They didn't call it Dogman around the office, though. They called it DX587. So when people initially talked about it, I figured it was some kind of experimental weapon or a freaking robot that they used to patrol the border. We would have tailgate meetings in the morning, and our supervisor would say stuff like, "There are DX587s working in Zone 6. I want you guys to stay clear of that area and work Zone 4. They talked about it real casually, so I figured, hey, don't worry about it. Besides, most of the guys I work with had never seen it. That was until one afternoon. 2 of my crew members and I were out in Zone 6 repairing the fence. Some illegals had taken a blowtorch to the fence, cutting through the 3 feet metal rods and creating a hole that you could simply drive a truck through. Until that day, I'd never seen DX587. Hell, to be honest with you, by that time, I figured it all was some bullshit. I figured the cartel had paid our supervisors to come up with this story about DX587 just to keep us out of the areas where they'd be trafficking the drugs through. I never actually imagined that DX587 actually existed, and it was a real threat. Back to what I was saying. We're in Zone 6, and I'm working a spider crane trying to replace the metal that had been damaged. Sandy and Brent, the other 2 guys with me, are trying to hold on to this rod and guide it into its foundation. That's when we see a group of people running towards us. It had to be 30 people, most of them men. They were running north towards the U.S. border. Now, our viewpoint was elevated, so we had a damn good view of this. Sandy, one of the guys who had been working in this area the longest, was one of those slow talkers. And he said, "Them people getting chased by something. I'm not sure what it is, but they running for their lives. It's time we get moving." The crowd was still a good distance away, and we decided we should start loading the truck. But that's when we started hearing screams and growling sounds. We all just stood there frozen, and it started to sink into us that this was DX587 at work. This creature actually fucking existed. Through my binoculars, I could see what looked like 2 huge dogs chasing these people. At first, I just figured they were being chased by a pack of wild dogs. Very big dogs, but yet just wild dogs. That was until I saw one of the dogs stand up on his 2 hind legs. For a second, I thought I was tripping. So I threw the binoculars to Sandy, telling him to take a look and not telling him exactly what I saw. And at first, he thought it was funny. He said, "Look at them dogs, having a field day with them." Then he went silent and said, "What the hell? That ain't no dogs." That's when he tossed me the binoculars and started tightening the straps on the truck, and we left. When we returned to the yard, it was dark, but our manager was still there in the office. This is where the strange part really starts to happen. He apologizes to us and said, "You guys should not have been in Zone 6 today." He went on to explain that he made a mistake in his morning briefing. He then said, "What you saw today was DX587 that we've been trying to avoid. I'm happy you guys are safe, but I'm going to have to let you go." Now, at this point in time, I'm completely pissed off. I asked him, first of all, how did you know what we saw today? Because none of us told him what we saw. Secondly, how are you going to let me go because I saw something? I was just doing my job. That went absolutely nowhere. And yes, we were fired because of what we saw. I was given a $13,000 severance check the very next day. And when that finally calmed down, I approached my supervisor like a man and said, "Hey, what the fuck is all this about?" And that's when he tied it all in this neat knot. He simply said we would never get any work done if people really knew what was out there. In other words, we were paid off to be silent and go away. so they can keep their government contract and have a steady flow of workers. Ain't that a bitch? Chinese dissidents and MI6 agents. Time was up and everyone had done their jobs. Mary had made contact with the two inside men who were able to confirm two things. Number one, that they could get us inside of Sorkin's building with the clearance to go to any level. And number two, that the underground parking lot was not a parking lot at all. It was a series of underground labs where Sorkin was doing genetic experiments. Now, only one of them had access to the lowest levels of the complex. And he told her that what they were doing down there was pure evil. The only problem was the contact was not able to confirm what kind of experiments were being conducted. And therefore, we were walking into this situation blind. For all we knew, Sorkin could be developing super soldiers, and we would be walking into certain death. The team left on a Friday morning heading to Chengdu, China, a 22-hour flight. It was myself, Roger, Ben, Scissors, Kid, and Chef. That was quiet on this flight for the first 6 hours, until Roger broke out a bottle of whiskey, and everyone got to drinking. As time passed, I could feel us starting to become a team again. Scissors and Kids toward the back of the plane discussing what part of China had the better looking women, Shanghai or Beijing. Roger and Ben reviewing the intel, and Chef was reading a cookbook. Things were starting to feel normal again. But this was just the calm before the storm. Because from the moment we landed in China, things would start moving fast, extremely fast. When we landed, Ben's cell phone rang, and it was Mary's husband, asking him if Ben had spoken with Mary. He said that she hadn't come home, and it was unusual for her. Her movements were like clockwork, which later on we would find out it was this exact same predictability of movement that was Mary's problem. We drove north for 5 hours into the mountainous regions until we got to the city where Chung lived. And I'll tell you, the Chinese countryside is beautiful, rolling hills and mountains. But the people there lived in abject poverty, like nothing I've ever seen. Remember the old black and white movies where there was this villain that lived along the side of a mountain or a hill, like Count Dracula's castle, sitting on top of a mountain looking down on the poor masses of peasants? This is exactly how Sorkin's building was set up. High on a mountaintop, houses were cascading down the mountainside into this small valley. This was some straight modern day medieval bullshit going on. These people didn't even have power, but this building was shining brightly as the sun set behind the mountain. We were told that we could find Chung, the person we need to make contact with, near the center of town. And I swear to you guys, we have it lucky in the United States. The way these people were living was heartbreaking. Roger was the only one of us who was able to speak a little bit of Mandarin. And it didn't take long before a kid walked up to us and started pointing towards this rickety building. Outside, some men were sitting at a table drinking tea. Approaching the building, the men quickly stood up, walking away, scattering in all different directions. In that moment, I thought this was some type of setup and these men were clearing out before we got hit. But then I realized that Ben was trailing behind the group. And compared to the smaller physiques of these Chinese men, Ben looked like a